no one really knows what's going to happen next. And that uncertainty is very challenging for the global economy. You kind of have to wonder like when it all goes up in smoke. I think stable coins are the most important thing to happen in crypto in the last 5 years. Um, really, they've impacted the market in good ways, bad ways, but the utility to consumers is huge.
And just the onboarding, the ability to be able to, the friction you've got with the existing banking system is your biggest nightmare.
Yeah, and that's been good and bad, the role of stablecoins. I think stablecoins have made it arguably too easy to launch like offshore platforms. Because before, one of the big challenges with an offshore platform is they didn't have, US dollars, which made the trading experience not great. Now you have these stable coins, and so you have a lot of offshore, you have a lot of offshore venues that frankly wouldn't really exist today if there weren't stable coins. And I do think that those offshore venues are probably a big challenge for crypto going forward as it grows. Now at the same time, stable coins are actually probably the most used crypto from a transactional standpoint, from a like, I'm someone in Argentina, what do I hold? I probably hold USDC or USDT. And so they've generated a lot of real world value and utility, which I think is really positive for the whole market. It's super important. That whole domain space has been really good.
Doesn't it, just as a side note, doesn't it worry you that the entire world gets dollarized? Because everybody's using dollars, right? There's almost no other stable coin that's used outside of dollars.
Yeah, it's a very dollar world. That's true generally in the financial system, though. Is like it's very dollarized outside of China. So I'm not surprised by it. And I actually think that's one of the big macro challenges for the world. Not because of stablecoins. Stablecoins are pretty small relatively. But the increasing dollarization of the world leaves a lot of countries without economic policy tools to help manage their economies. And it's something going on right now is, the Fed's drive to end inflation is wreaking havoc, on a lot of economies that are really linked to the dollar, the Eurozone, the UK, emerging markets. And I don't know if the net result of that in the long term is that people seek other currencies, a basket, the yen, or they seek out, Bitcoin. I think that's probably the least likely. But there is going to be a real reckoning on that. And it's a really interesting thing to me. I'm curious for your take on it. Like a lot of the US's economic advantage is that everyone uses dollars, right? And the dollarization, didn't really exist in the Volcker era. Now we have this dollarization of the whole world. It's a huge economic advantage for the US. But if we continue what we're doing right now on the Fed level, I think it's going to make it increasingly hard for countries to be part of the dollarized system. And like, where does that start breaking things for the US over the next
I've
couple
always
of years?
thought that the dollar dies of strength and not weakness for the reasons that you say. People don't realize, 87%, the US is 25% of world GDP and 87% of world trade is in dollars. The US is 100% of world GDP in debt. It's the most indebted any country's ever been in history. And the world probably owes another 200% of GDP in dollars. So it's a terrifying dollar world. And then you've got this weird situation where you're a South African exporting gold to China and you have to use dollars. Everybody has to use dollars in the middle of this global trade. And all I can imagine is that the world is going to walk away from this. Even the Europeans can't deal with it. Look at the UK right now. It's basically the US bond market and the Fed that's trashing the gilts market that's blowing up the pension system. At some point, they're all going to have to say enough is enough. Does that mean some sort of Plaza Accord, or does it mean a bifurcation or a basket system? I don't know, but I think your hunch is right. It's becoming unsustainable.
And it really is. What's interesting when you go out a level from there is away from the economic policy level. these are also our closest allies, right? And we're basically running them over with the Federal Reserve. And I don't know at what point that breaks, but it's super concerning to me, and I think pretty dangerous for the world. Um, I do think we're going into a period of unprecedented uncertainty, um, and that is going to be the theme of the next year. Really, is that uncertainty, and we see that in our institutional business. You know, so for context there, we serve about 1,000 clients actively. We have another couple thousand onboarded. We run a spot execution desk as well as a derivatives desk and custody and all these sort of prime broker activities. And we trade a lot of flow, a lot of volume. Right now, everyone is trying to reduce and hedge risk. There is no risk seeking in the institutional side of crypto right now. It's all risk down or risk manage. And it's really because of this idea of uncertainty. And I think, no one really knows what's going to happen next. And that uncertainty is very challenging for the global economy. You kind of have to wonder, like, when it all goes up in smoke. It's very, very unclear to me right now.
Yeah, to me, I feel like we're closer to the end than the middle. Just seeing what's happening in the bond markets, they've become totally unanchored from inflation expectations, GDP growth, everything. It's just liquidity. There's no buyers of bonds. And we know the answer. The Japanese have always told us the answer in advance, which is yield curve control. And the UK is getting into the yield curve control game again. And the Europeans will be there and the US will have to be there. So it feels that there is only one answer that we've got left in this financial system that's broken, which is turn the taps back on. Arthur Hayes made that point very clear to me. He's like, it's the only game in town because it works for the politicians. Asset prices go up and it saves the system from implosion is by devaluing the currency, the denominator, by...
And I think that's probably true because you also need to more or less inflate away the debt relative to like economic output. The question for me, though, is, in the US, we have a slightly more independent Fed than some countries. And it seems like we have, kind of two political things going on right now that are challenging. One is the Fed really wanting to be the Fed that tamed the inflation monster. That's clearly a very important talking point for them. They could have just said, like, our inflation target is now 5%. Have a nice day. We're raising 25 points for the next 8 quarters till we get to 5%. But they said, no, our target is 2%. And let's blow out the world market. So that's one thing that's, unclear to me is, yes, it works for the politicians, yield control, but I'm not sure that the politicians and the Fed are on the same page.
And Arthur's point was the person who owns the chain is the politician and the central bank at the end of the chain, because in the end, it's voters.
Yeah.
And you buy votes. It's become a game.
It's like the old election cycle trading strategy, right? Like you always want to be long into the presidential election. But that's pretty, the Fed has staked out a very strong position that I think is going to be hard for them to walk back from, even if it's, defies logic not to. And then I think the other thing that, we kind of all have to be aware of in the world is we have a land war in Europe, a really big one. And, when that happened, that was originally like, oh, this is going to be 6 to 8 weeks and we'll all get back on with our lives. We're close to a year of that conflict now. And, resolution of it looks further, not closer. And it seems to be escalating, right? I think, particularly challenging that you have on one side one of the largest energy exporters, and on the other side you have the largest food exporter outside of America, right? And you have politicians that have made choices over the last 5 to 10 years to deprioritize nuclear energy, deprioritize, natural gas extraction. There's a real lack of energy and food in the world today, which is going to keep driving inflation no matter what the Fed wants to do.
Hey visionaries, thank you for tuning in. For more free crypto content like this, head over to realvision.com/crypto. You'll get early access to the most brilliant minds in the space to cut through the noise, get in-depth analysis, and get you ahead of the curve with unbiased insights.